Before we begin today's video, you're probably wondering, where the heck is Aztecross? His voice is gone. Sickness has stolen it, so until Cross's voice recovers, you guys will just have to settle for me. If you don't know who I am, my name is Luke. I'm a manager/editor on the Aztecross team. If you've stopped by our Twitch stream, you've probably heard Cross yell my name like a million times. Under normal circumstances, we just wait until Cross's voice had recovered, but in this specific case, since it's Rite of the 9 content that just released, we wanted to make sure that we got it to you guys as soon as possible. All the content covered in today's video is going to be exactly the same, so if you can put up with my lack of a thick Louisiana accent, feel free to stick around because we'll be covering everything you need to know about the Destiny 2 Rite of the 9 update. Rite of the 9 has finally arrived. This is our last major content update before the Edge of Fate launches this summer on July 15th. The major selling point of Rite of the 9 is that it's refreshing 3 of our existing dungeons. That includes Prophecy, Ghost of the Deep, and Spire of the Watcher, which is the focus of the latter half of this video. The best part about Rite of the 9 is that it's free to play. So even if you don't own any of the previous expansions, you can still participate and get in some sick loot. That includes shiny weapons, adept weapons, shiny adept weapons. Oh yeah, that's sexy. All of this serves as a prologue to the Edge of Fate expansion. We've gotten some cutscenes, some lore drops. The dungeons are on a featured weekly rotator. So right now, Spire of the Watcher is the main dungeon. And as the weeks progress, we should get more story unlocks, perhaps more cutscenes that are really teeing up the storyline for Edge of Fate. Once again, this video is going to focus on Spire of the Watcher, but in future weeks, once we unlock the Rite of the 9 versions of both the Ghost of the Deep and Prophecy dungeons, we'll have dedicated videos walking you through how to complete each of those dungeons as well. So without further ado, let's get into the guide. Now starting off, there isn't exactly a mainline quest for this event like you'd expect, but if you click on the Eternity destination in your director, you'll see alongside Xur's Treasure Hoard and Dares of Eternity, we have 2 new nodes. One being for the Rite of the 9 destination, which is where you'll be interacting with the Emissary, who's the vendor for this event. Think of this location like the Hall of Champions, back when Shaxx was here in Into the Light. He was surrounded by all the brave weapons, you could attune them. It's essentially the same thing. And the second node is for this week's featured dungeon, Spire of the Watcher. There's also 2 empty nodes on the left-hand side of the screen. This is probably going to be where Prophecy and Ghost of the Deep live once they arrive in future weekly rotations. Now, when you load in to Rite of the 9, you may recognize this location as the same place where we hosted Trials of the 9 back in year 1 of Destiny 2, which is really cool to finally be making a return here. This is where you'll interact with the Emissary, attune for specific weapons, turn in event currency to get more drops, and you can even see the featured dungeon of the week looming in the background. Foreboding. The currency for this event is called Nonary Manifold. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. You can turn in these Nonary Manifolds to the right of the Emissary at this chest, which will give you random event weapons. Each pull from the chest is going to cost you 250 manifold, but remember, Bungie gave everyone 1,500 manifold for free as compensation for taking away the glitched weapons people earned when Rite of the 9 dropped early. So you should be able to get 6 weapons right off the bat if you really want to. These also have the chance to drop as shiny weapons with a new holofoil or adept drops, which is really nice. But something we noticed is that you can only receive weapons from the featured dungeon of the week. So even if you attune for a Prophecy or Ghost of the Deep weapon, you will only receive a weapon from Spire of the Watcher. I imagine what's going to happen is in future weeks, either Bungie is going to replace the weapons in that chest with the new featured dungeon, or they're going to add the featured dungeon weapons to that loot pool. Either way, we're going to be checking this in next week's featured dungeon guide, so be sure to watch that for an update. Looking at the Emissary, you'll find daily bounties. Each of these will reward you with 35 manifold, and the repeatable bounties will reward you with 15 manifold. Here you can also turn in your Curios of the 9. These are rewards we've been earning all throughout Heresy via completing seasonal challenges, so if you have any in your inventory, under offerings, the Emissary will have a Nonary Manifold Converter. These will convert your Curios into manifolds, which can then be spent on weapons. Now, at this moment in time, we're not entirely sure what the conversion rate is. We turned in 11 and got back 320, which is like a 29.1 manifold per Curio conversion rate, which is really strange. But then we turned in 2 and got 80, which is essentially 40 each. So I'm not sure what's going on here. Whatever the case, make sure that you turn in those Curios and complete those seasonal challenges to maximize the amount of manifolds that you can get. There's also an option here, if you're really desperate and don't have any glimmer, to trade in manifolds for raid banners. I wouldn't recommend it, but if you need it, it's there for you. Looking at the white shader here, it's It's pretty nice, but it is locked behind the Rite of the Nine seal and the Eternal title. So you got to complete that before you can access it. Looking at the challenges here, there's not too many of them, but it does appear like they are time gated. And so it's probably going to be a total of 3 weeks when we get all of the dungeons in rotation before you can actually complete the seal and get this new shader. Next up, we can see the Seer emblem earned from the Who Watches triumph, which requires you to get gold on each encounter of the Spire of the Watcher dungeon on Eternity mode. And just for reference, Eternity is like the normal difficulty. Ultimatum is the more difficult one. So they've actually tied it to the easier mode that most people are going to be familiar with running already. And if you don't know what gold means, don't worry, we'll go over all the tiers in just a moment. Now there's also another emblem called Calibrated, which is earned by completing the Foiled Again triumph. This requires us to complete all 9 Elegant Arsenal quests. These quests are located at the bottom here, and for this week, we have access to the Long Arm and Wilderflight quests, which just requires us to complete the dungeon, so super simple here. Moving on, right behind the Emissary are 12 weapons available to attune, which will increase your chances of getting that specific weapon to drop. Now, that does not mean it's guaranteed, and like we mentioned before, it seems to be limited to the weapons that are available in the featured dungeon. So unfortunately, you cannot get prophecy weapons to drop from Spire of the Watcher. We tried. We also ran the normal version of the prophecy dungeon that you can still access in the director. Unfortunately, it does look like it's still only dropping the old loot pool. Damn you, time gating! Now, you've probably already noticed a chest right in front of the Emissary that says, "Accept a gift from the Nine." Opening this chest will provide you with a full set of pinnacle gear, so if you're not already at the cap, go ahead and grab these on all 3 characters, because this is going to prepare you to do all the Rite of the Nine dungeons on their hardest difficulty. Now, each of these dungeons has 3 difficulties to choose from. First off, we have Explorer mode, which is brand new to Destiny. This mode essentially serves as an onboarding for new players and an introduction to the dungeon to players who aren't familiar with the mechanics. Tooltips will pop up on screen and explain mechanics to you, and waypoints will show up guiding you through traversal sections of the dungeon in case you get lost. This mode is strictly for practice, so you cannot earn any of the dungeon triumphs or the dungeon exotic from Explorer mode. And I should also mention that if you're a solo player, Explorer mode does have built-in matchmaking. So if you've never done a dungeon before, Bungie has essentially removed all of the barriers, allowing you to try it out. Next up, we have Eternity mode, which is essentially your normal mode of the dungeon. This will feel just like your standard dungeon experience, but with a few twists to the mechanics that we'll cover in the guide portion of this video. Now, we've also got a couple modifiers like Brawn on Eternity mode, and there are Banes as well, which you got to be careful of. And finally, we have Ultimatum mode, which is meant to be on the same level as contest difficulty. Enemies have more health, they hit harder, and enrage timers will be in place for certain encounters. Additionally, there will be revive tokens throughout the entire dungeon, yes, including traversal, and the Not Swap modifier will be active. Not Swap is a modifier that drains all of your ability energy if you change exotic armor or change between special and primary ammo types. Now, there is a slight caveat in that switching between 2 different exotic class items does not trigger Not Swap, but there's not a plethora of circumstances where that's going to be very helpful. Now, the whole reason for all this extra difficulty is that all drops are guaranteed to be Adept dungeon loot. So every time you complete an encounter, Adept weapons are guaranteed to drop, which is a first because we've never had Adept dungeon loot in the past. There's also a couple triumphs tied to Ultimatum as well, so you're going to have to dive into that hardest difficulty if you're looking to secure that Eternal Seal, which leads us right into our Spire of the Watcher Ultimatum Guide. Now, there are a few changes across all of Spire's encounters, and you will notice it very quickly if you're already familiar with the dungeon. However, we'll be covering all the mechanics, so if you haven't ever played Spire, this guide will still help you if you just want to play the normal version of the dungeon. Now, the first change, and this is true across both the Eternity and Ultimatum difficulty, is that each encounter is now ranked based off how many deaths your fire team has. For example, when you load in, you'll see text on the left side of your screen that says Gold Tier, Deaths remaining 2, meaning you're technically only allowed 1 death as a team, because if you die twice, this drops you down to silver tier. And if you die another time, this drops you down to bronze. Your rewards at the end of the encounter are scaled based off the tier that you complete with. Gold is the best, bronze is the worst. You get the idea. When we did a gold completion, we got 80 manifolds to drop from the chest, as well as a weapon with double perks. This isn't the same as an actual shiny weapon drop, as those seem to be random and will drop with double perks alongside the new holofoil look. A completion at silver tier gave us 70 manifolds, and the weapon that dropped had double perks in the third column. Now it's possible those could also drop in the fourth column, but it seems like at least one column will have double perks, just not both of them. Lastly, a bronze completion will net you 60 manifolds alongside a weapon that has your normal single perks per column. Now, something to keep note, if you ever do fall below gold tier, you can just wipe and restart the encounter. So unless you're pressed for time, there's really no reason not to go for that gold tier loot. When you first touch down, the path forward should be pretty obvious. Just head through the rock formation and keep close to the mountainside on your left. After a short traversal section, you will arrive at the opening encounter. Killing the Vex Goblin starts the encounter, and your goal is to activate all 4 yellow electrical lines that lead to the center of the map. This mechanic is present throughout the dungeon, so if you learn it here, it's really easy to replicate in later encounters. Now, each of these electricity lines is covered in nodes. The ending node is in the center of the map, and if you trace it back, you'll eventually come across the starting node, which will be marked by these arrows. Starting with this node, you need to shoot every single node along the line in sequence until you reach the final node and the circuit is complete. Now, in order to activate the nodes, you need to have the Arctrician buff. To get this, you kill a Minotaur, it'll drop a white circle on the ground, you step inside of it, and you've got the Arctrician buff for 30 seconds. Once you have the Arctrician buff, head back to that starting node, and once you shoot the second node in sequence, the line behind you should turn a bright blue color. If the line doesn't change color, it means you either don't have the Arctrician buff or you're shooting the nodes in the incorrect sequence. So make sure you trace correctly and are shooting the nodes in order to fully complete each circuit. Another way to tell if you're shooting the correct node is that your Arctrician buff will actually refresh. So you can just look down in the bottom left. If you get an extra couple seconds, then you know you're shooting the right node. Now, one thing to watch out for during this encounter is there will actually be Hydras positioned up on the cliffside. So if you've got a long range weapon, like a linear fusion or a sniper rifle, makes this encounter way easier because these guys hurt. And if you're on a harder difficulty, you'll actually see some nuclear banes spawning occasionally, and you need to either take them out or get behind cover because they will explode and waste valuable revive tokens that you need for that gold tier completion. Just make sure you have decent ad clear and survivability on for this encounter, and you should be fine. After completing all 4 circuits, a Hydra boss will spawn, and upon killing him, the opening counter is complete. If you're on Explorer mode, this Hydra boss actually won't spawn, but you can grab your loot and jump into the giant hole in the ground to progress forward. This next section has a jumping puzzle. If you're not too great at it, don't worry. If one of your fire team progresses far enough, some catch-up platforms will spawn in. I'll go ahead and let the footage just play out, but if you follow our path here, you'll be able to grab a secret chest and one of 2 Spire collectibles that were just added in Rite of the Nine. Once you have passed the jumping puzzle, you have arrived at the first encounter. The goal here is the same as the opening encounter, with a key difference. There are now 3 floors of electrical lines you have to complete, with 2 lines on each floor. To start the encounter, kill this Minotaur and just follow the yellow lines to each node. While you travel around the tower, keep an eye out for Vex detains. These guys spawn in these red boxes and will fly straight towards you, locking you in a detainment bubble, which, if that happens at the wrong moment and you're inside Vex radiolaria or being shot at by an enemy, you're pretty much screwed. So take these guys out as soon as you see them. Both electrical lines must be completed on each floor to continue forward, and upon completing a set of lines, some elites and bosses will spawn. These enemies lock the doors to the elevators needed to move to the next floor, so kill them quickly. On the first floor, there will be 3 harpies that spawn, the second floor will spawn a Hydra, and the final floor will spawn in a Minotaur boss with a very large health bar. If at any point you find yourself out of the Arcturian buff with no Minotaurs around, killing the Hydras floating around will spawn another Minotaur. If you're on Eternity mode, you can take this encounter at any pace you like. If you're on Ultimatum mode, this encounter has a timer on it, giving you only 5 minutes to clear the whole thing. If you're running on Explore mode, you don't have to worry about detains or bosses on each floor. Once you've dealt with the Minotaur, the encounter will be completed, and you can quickly make your way to encounter 2 by following the path shown here. Now, the second encounter is our first boss, and this is going to change up some of the mechanics you've just learned. Now, once again, you will see 4 electrical lines extending from the center of the room out along 4 different platforms, and a giant harpy boss in the center doing who knows what to that Minotaur. Killing this Minotaur will start the encounter, and shortly after, you'll see 4 3D Vex shapes appear in the sky at the center of the platform. You'll then notice that each of the starting nodes has a shape floating just above it. This is pretty simple. Just note what Vex shapes are floating in the sky from top to bottom and complete the electrical nodes in this order. All that matters is that you complete the circuit in that order. So it doesn't matter what nodes you start with, as long as you finish a line with the proper shape. If you do finish a line with the wrong shape, it'll start a 30-second timer that will wipe you once it hits 0. However, this wipe can be averted if you finish all 4 lines before the timer expires. Once you complete the 4th and final circuit in the arena, the boss will move to the ending node of that circuit and DPS will begin. The Harpy will flare out its armor, revealing a bunch of red eyes. You need to shoot these eyes, and upon destroying the final red eye, the boss will reveal a giant white eye, which is where you want to shoot in order to deal damage. He will then begin retreating to the center of the platform, and if you notice, his health bar has a flashing portion that is a health gate. Not clearing this gate in time will cause the boss to explode, dealing damage and knocking you back. However, if you do clear this health gate, the boss won't explode. Instead, he'll temporarily stun, allowing for a bit more time to deal damage. Rinse and repeat this process until the boss is dead. For weapons, I highly recommend Queenbreaker. The boss has a crit that's really easy to hit, and Queenbreaker right now is just a DPS monster. If you're running this encounter in Ultimatum mode, you will only have 3 damage phases to kill the boss, or he will wipe you. If you're running it in Eternity mode, you have as many phases as you like, and if you're in Explorer mode, not only do you have infinite phases, but you also have no requirement to shoot the circuits in any particular order. Moving on, we have another traversal section, but this one introduces a new mechanic, that being red electrical lines. The key difference being that unlike the yellows, these don't need to be shot in sequence. Instead, they rely on speed. If you don't activate them in a short time period, they lose power and make you start over. Rite of the Nine has also added an additional layer. Not only do you need to be fast, but now the red nodes only open one at a time. So you have to keep your eyes out, check what the next node is. Once you shot one, look for another. It's a little bit complicated. We'll be showing it in the footage here, but if you're on Explorer mode, you don't have to worry about this extra mechanic. In the final electrical room, there's actually a second secret chest. Just follow our path on screen. We drop down into this hole and under the staircase here. The second collectible added in Rite of the Nine can also be found right before you drop down into the final boss room. Again, just watch the footage. You'll see how to find it pretty easily. Once you fall down this long shaft, you have now entered the final boss encounter. This room combines all of the mechanics you've seen previously in the dungeon, except this time, you're fighting a giant wyvern at the same time, which can melt you really quickly. Now to start out, the boss will walk into the spawn room, shutting the main center door behind him, and our first goal is to get this door back open. To do so, you must kill the hydras that spawn on the left and right sides of the room. Doing so will spawn in minotaurs at the same location. Killing these minotaurs will drop the Arctrician buff, which you want to use to shoot the 5 red nodes in the center of the spawn room. Once again, you must shoot these quickly, as only 1 red node will be open at a time. Successfully doing so will open 2 of the 4 starting nodes for the yellow electrical lines running into the reactor room. At the same time, 6 Vex detained boxes will spawn. 3 in the spawn room and 3 in the reactor room. Some 3D Vex shapes will spawn in the center of the room, corresponding to the 2 open yellow electrical lines. Same as before, you need to complete these yellow lines in the order that those shapes are presented, top to bottom. However, you want to make sure you do not complete the second yellow line until the boss is located in the reactor room. Once you do that, the boss will begin interacting with the reactor. Once he does, run back to the spawn room where the red nodes will be open once more. Shooting all 5 successfully in time will shut the reactor room door, which will then explode and trigger the DPS phase. At first, the boss will be staggered, but then he'll start walking towards you, shooting out Void Wyvern blasts. After a short time, the boss will fully make his way back into the spawn room, and the DPS phase will end. After that, it's just rinse and repeat. In Eternity mode, you have as many attempts as you like, but in Ultimatum mode, you need to kill the boss in 3 phases. Explorer mode, same as before. You don't have to worry about red electrical lines being closed. The yellow lines you can do in any order, and Vex detains don't exist, so that's a major plus. For DPS here, there's actually a couple options I recommend. I've seen people using Song of Flame, Tractor Cannon, Apotheos Veil with Grand Overture to stagger the boss in the reactor room, but I've also seen others use Well and Hunker Down with 1k voices to just delete the boss's health bar really easily. Our team actually used Divinity and 2 Queen Breakers just to make sure that we were hitting those crits guaranteed. So you've got a couple options, but at the end of the day, just make sure your survivability is good and your damage is high, and you should clear this thing no problem. Now, as a final note, if you complete a full clear, meaning not from a checkpoint on Eternity or higher difficulty, the boss will reward a second chest that drops 2 weapons and 50 manifolds. Nice. Now, if you grabbed this week's collectibles when you ran through the dungeon, if you head back to the Rite of the Nine social space, you'll actually be able to interact with them and view some new cutscenes. We had already seen 1 cutscene earlier, so that makes 3 total for this week. And since there are 9 pillars and 6 collectibles, I imagine we'll get all of these cutscenes over the next 3 weeks. So make sure you're doing the dungeons and collectibles so you can give them a watch. Again, we're going to be doing a guide on both Ghosts of the Deep and Prophecy as they become available. And that's it. That concludes our guide of Rite of the Nine and Spire of the Watcher. Hopefully you guys found this guide useful. Again, I know this is a little different than our usual MO with Cross being out. I don't even know if it's possible to cover a TWAB without him. So hopefully he's back tomorrow, but whatever the case, we'll be covering it either way. So until then, thank you guys all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.